Welcome to Breaking Through with me, Kristen Rao Finkbeiner, powered by Moms Rising. We're really thrilled that you're joining us today because we have a lot to learn, a lot of action, and a lot to do together. We start out talking with the National Partnership about the history of the fight for paid family medical leave, for healthcare, and more, and why Republicans are out of step with what their own Republican constituents want them to do right now and what we can do about it. Next up, we talk with the Institute for Women's Policy Research, IWPR, about what the data says about the fastest way to close the gaps in family economic security. Following that, we check in with Kind about fair treatment of immigrants and why it's so important to everyone. We close the show talking about facing unequal pay in America and what are the solutions that allow everyone of all genders to rise. We're going to jump right in with our first guest. Welcome back to Breaking Through with me, Kristen Rao Finkbeiner, powered by Moms Rising. We are joined by a spectacular, amazing guest who you're going to love hearing from, Deborah Vagins, who is with Equal Rights Advocates and Equal Pay Today. Yes, we need equal pay. Thank you. Welcome, Deborah.
It's so great to be here. Thank you.
I want to start out by really putting the spotlight on unequal pay in America. Sometimes people are like, oh, we have equal pay for equal work here. Well, we don't. And a lot of data says that we do not, that we are doing equal work and we're getting unequal pay. Can you give us sort of an overview of what's happening?
Yeah, absolutely. So the laws protecting equal pay for equal work were passed in the 1960s, and so people think that we are done and it's all completed and everything is caught up and we're equal. The data belies that, right? So we know that, if you look at the overall averages, that women make 75 cents on the dollar when you look at all workers, part-time, part year, seasonal, and so on. And then when you look at the statistics for women of color, those numbers are generally even worse, pretty dramatically bad. There are many reasons why that is still the case. We learned a lot since we passed our first civil rights and employment discrimination laws in the 1960s, but the laws have not kept up with the modern workplace. So there are lots of things that contribute to the pay gap, not just unequal pay for equal work, but workplace harassment, lack of paid leave, occupational segregation. All of these things persist, depress women's wages, and the laws haven't caught up.
When we look at the actual numbers for unequal pay, what do they look like? What percentage are women overall making to men overall? And then, of course, we know that because of impacts of our intersectional lives as we walk around this country are different based on what communities we're part of. So what's it looking like numerically?
Right. So I just mentioned when you look overall, right, for equal pay, we just had in March 25th, our Equal Pay Day, which looks at all women. That was 75 cents on the dollar compared to all men. And actually, you and I were working together on Mom's Equal Pay Day, which was on May 6th. Those numbers are terrible. When you look at all moms working compared to all fathers working, that number is 62 cents on the dollar. And coming up, our next one in July, one of our next ones in July, is Black Women's Equal Pay Day, and Black women earn 64 cents on the dollar compared to non-Hispanic white men. So the numbers are abysmal.
Abysmal, absolutely abysmal. What are the solutions?
Well, like the wage gap itself, which, as you mentioned, there's intersectional impacts. There are a lot of reasons why these numbers are so bad. The lack of equal pay for same or similar work, reliance on salary history when you're setting new wages, lack of pay transparency. We don't know a lot of jobs. You don't know what the pay range is that you're applying to. There are the sub-minimum wage and minimum wage, egregiously low pay scales in some places. We know that women are segregated into the lowest paid work across the country. We also have a lack of robust employment protections for caregivers or for workplace harassment, for example. So all of those things work to depress women's wages. So the solutions are also multi-pronged. Equal Pay Today is a national coalition. Moms Rising is a wonderful member of that coalition. organization. We are 50 state, national, and tribal organizations strong across the United States. And we recently put out a policy agenda that identifies some of the solutions to this problem, looking at pieces of legislation like the Paycheck Fairness Act, which would update the Equal Pay Act of 1963, the Salary Transparency Act that would help reduce the pay gap by requiring employers to provide salary ranges, right? Shocker for that. But then if you also look at workplace harassment, we are endorsing the Be Heard in the Workplace Act, which is a federal bill that would strengthen workplace protections. And there are more for each of the things that I mentioned, the Raise the Wage Act, so that we are not living on poverty level wages. And we also identify state laws across the country in over a dozen states that are also working to increase paid leave and increase the minimum wage and so on.
And then there's also all of the care policies, access to childcare, access to health care, access to sick days, access to paid family medical leave that studies show would help lower the wage gaps between moms and non-moms, which then significantly lowers the wage gaps overall because 86% of people become moms by the time they're 44 years old. So that's a lot of people that we're lowering the wage gap with. And one of the things that annoys me about the wage gap, I have many things that annoy me. I'm going to lift up two. But one of the things that annoys me is people say, well, it's your fault. You're just not, quote, leaning in enough. Well, listeners, viewers, we have some data for you. Cornell University and Stanford University, through Dr. Shelley Correll, did a series of studies of pieces of paper. Now, pieces of paper cannot lean in. They cannot lean out. They cannot lean sideways. They cannot wiggle. They are pieces of paper. And so these pieces of paper had equal resumes and job experiences. But one thing was different. That one thing was different was, were you a mom? And moms were hired 80 to 100% less of the time than non-moms. That is huge. They also were offered $11,000 lower starting salaries for highly paid jobs than non-moms.
Yep.
Now, we did this study with dads because it's like, oh, is it parenting that's making you get less money? No, dads were offered $6,000 more than moms and than people who were men without kids. And so what we're having here is an experience of proving that the pay gap, that discrimination is real. It's not about leaning in or leaning out. Again, this is equal resumes, equal job experiences. This is really about discrimination. And that's why it takes not 3, but 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different types of legislation to solve this problem. Now, this is the second thing that annoys me about this. So my first annoyance was people say you're not leaning in. Well, we say to that, we have mountains of rooms of studies that show that, yes, we are leaning in and we're still getting unequal pay. The second annoyance is that people say that's too many things that we have to do to close the wage gap. Now, to that, I'm also annoyed because the U.S. Congress, on average, looks at thousands of bills per year. They do many things. Usually in normal times, they can walk, chew gum, and rub their belly and get multiple different types of bills done at the same time. And in this instance, it's not rocket science what's going to close the wage gap. We know the solutions. We're like the last industrialized nation on the actual planet Earth to pass these forward. So we know that we can both address very real discrimination, which is my first annoyance, and 2, do it in a multifaceted way at the same time. What is your take on those two annoyances? And do you have other annoyances to add to the list?
I love it. If I listed all my annoyances, it would take too long, but everything you said was dead on. So I was listing some of the pieces of legislation, and I had not yet gotten to issues of paid leave and family caregiver protections. There are pieces of legislation, the Healthy Families Act, the Family Act, the Caring for All Families Act. There are pieces of legislation out there that would solve the problem. And you also discussed things, the phenomena called the motherhood penalty, right? Where employers assume that mothers are going to be less productive or less devoted, and that translates into pay discrimination, right? But there's the fatherhood bonus that you also discussed, where men are given more because they are fathers. And all of those phenomena depress women's wages, contribute to lower wages through direct discrimination. And so it's direct discrimination as well as things that people would not identify as discrimination, just these poverty level wages that apply to everyone. But the issue is that women, and predominantly women of color, are overrepresented in these exceedingly low jobs that often don't have protections for caregivers and so on. And here's the thing. Yes, we have our policy agenda, and folks can check it out at equalpaytoday.org, the number 2 today. And you can see this list. This would get us, this would solve so much if we were to pass all of these. But I'll tell you what, we've been fighting for the Paycheck Fairness Act since, I think, 1997. This is one piece of legislation. It's passed the House several times. We have not gotten it through the Senate. If this one bill alone were passed, we would make a huge dent in the wage gap, because it would be the first bill in decades that gives people new tools to challenge the wage gap itself. It's not all we need, but my goodness, if Congress could do 1 or 2, we would be making progress for women across the country.
And we wouldn't just be making progress for women across the country. I like to tell people, I'm like, people of all genders, every single human in America would benefit if we close the wage gap. 72% of our GDP is based on consumer spending, people. And women and moms make 80% of those consumer spending decisions. So when we don't have money to be spent, when we aren't paid equally, then it actually depresses and suppresses our economy overall. And the inverse, the Institute for Women's Policy Research has found that we would have an increase in our GDP by 3 to 5% and pull at least half of all kids out of poverty if we had wage parity. So, it's one of those things where we actually all lose out when moms and women are losing out, and we all win when we're on better footing together. What are your thoughts? And we only have like 3 minutes.
Absolutely. We all win. This is a family economic security issue. I was talking about some of those protections that would give people who are litigating new tools, but you are absolutely correct. It would affect our economy. It would allow workers to contribute more fully to the economy and pay all workers what they rightfully earn.
Yeah, and so we need to give people some action points. I think everybody should call their House and their Senate member and say, we know that there's a lot going on right now, but instead of dismantling the policies that allow us to build good lives, how about you pass the Paycheck Fairness Act? What do you think?
Absolutely. They should call and ask to pass the Paycheck Fairness Act. I will also say, because you mentioned it, that right now, this administration is dismantling the federal civil rights and employment discrimination agencies that protect all of us. They are firing workers. They are cutting their budgets. They are saying they will not enforce parts of the law to protect all employees. Your members of Congress also need to hear that this is unacceptable, and we have to defend the critical mission of these agencies, like the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the Department of Labor and the Women's Bureau.
And can people go to the Equal Rights Advocates website and find out more information on this, or where should they go?
Yes, they can go to Equal Rights Advocates website, but as well as the Equal Pay Today, which is Equal Pay Today with the number 2.org. That is a website for our entire coalition and all the 50 members that I've talked about and Moms Rising. So check that out. That has this policy agenda and how you can plug in and help at the federal level and the state level.
So people, we need you to get involved. We need you to stay involved. We need you to support, become involved with, and stay involved with Equal Pay Today. You can sign up to get action alerts, figure out how to protect the EEOC, figure out how to protect the Women's Department, figure out how to advance policies like the Paycheck Fairness Act. Thank you so much for being on, Deborah. Thank you for all you do. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. My pleasure. And thank you back to you and all your members. You're incredible.
You're more incredible. Thank you. We're going to take a quick break, but stick around. We'll be right back with our next guest from the Institute for Women's Policy Research about what's happening in America numerically and actually for real, in real life, and how those numbers in real life intertwine. We'll be back in just a quick second. Welcome back to Breaking Through with me, Kristen Raufinkbeiner, powered by Moms Rising. We have a very special guest with us today, Jennifer Hojaiban, who is with KIND, Kids in Need of Defense. Welcome, Jennifer.
Thanks for having me.
Jennifer, we are in a really awful time in history where 1 in 4 kids in America are part of immigrant families, and we have Donald Trump and Republicans just doing an absolute attack on immigrant families. And one of the things that we're seeing happen is Donald Trump and members of Congress are trying to cut Medicaid in order to fund even more attacks, harm, cruelty with immigrant families. And they're doing this in a moment where we know that we absolutely need a safe, secure, compassionate, and orderly immigration system. But they have yet stood up to create that practice for the future. In fact, Donald Trump stopped us from being able to, us meaning members of Congress, a bipartisan proposal in Congress that would have really helped alleviate a lot of what's happening right now. What's happening and what are you seeing?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think what we're seeing now really is family separation. As most folks probably remember, during the last Trump administration, there was a formal policy of separating families at the border called zero tolerance that really, created a fierce public backlash and was challenged through the courts. And what we're seeing now is really a series of very harsh enforcement policies in communities, where ICE is showing up at homes and schools and Home Depot parking lots. And a consequence of it is really that many kids end up separated from their caregivers. So family separation has kind of moved from the border into our communities. We know that the goal of that zero tolerance policy was to deter others from coming. The current harsh enforcement approach is really terrorizing families. And I think their theory is the same as last time, that making enforcement really egregious will deter others. None of that's about protecting kids or keeping them safe, which we hear some trying to argue. In fact, some of our clients are even scared to come to our office where they would normally feel totally safe. Imagine where else they are scared to go: school, the doctor's office, and so on. I think there was this public perception that the administration would target criminals or other folks who are a threat to public safety as part of their deportation effort. I don't think Americans were voting to scare kids in this way.
No. And one of the things that we always have to raise to bust some of the many myths that are happening is that according to FBI statistics, people in immigrant families are actually less likely, significantly less likely to commit crimes than people in the general population. So we don't have kind of a flood of criminals, as the President Trump has said. Instead, we have the opposite happening. Again, less likely to commit crimes. One of the things that we're seeing over and over again is that with their blunt force of family separation, we are seeing a lack of due process, a lack of following the laws, a lack of following our Constitution. We're seeing a lot of illegal, quote, enforcement, end quote, that even Governor Newsom, the president, said he was going to put into prison just for being governor. Like, this is a vast overreach. And one of the things that people don't realize is that everybody has rights. Even at our borders, there's the right to asylum in both international and national law. And according to ICE research itself, more than 80% of people coming through our southern border would, if they had access to an attorney, have actually legally qualification for asylum. What's your take on this dramatic overreach where we're seeing people with definite legal status, with documentation, even the governor, again, of California, facing threats of jail and separation from his 4 kids?
Yeah, I think it's such an important question, and I think it is so important to first remember that there is a process, or at least there's supposed to be a process. And even when it's functioning well, it is imperfect, and we should all work to make it better. But it's so important not to circumvent that process, and that's especially the case when you're talking about unaccompanied children. And that's, the population that kinds founded to protect. You know, we're an organization that seeks to provide lawyers and social workers to unaccompanied kids, you know, who arrive at the border without a parent or guardian while they're, you know, throughout their immigration proceedings. And, you know, it's just especially important for these unaccompanied kids that we don't try to do a runaround around the process, because the system that is currently in place is intended to get to the bottom of a kid's story. When it works well, it should be a system that discovers if a child has the right to legal relief like asylum, or if the child should return to their country of origin for whatever reason. That system, of course, has a much better chance of working properly if children have lawyers to guide them in navigating this really, really complicated process. Right now, there's temporary federal funding so that that supports legal representation for some unaccompanied children, but even that isn't enough to meet the demand. So many, probably most unaccompanied children don't have a lawyer to stand with them when they have to go before an immigration judge in their deportation proceedings, or to help them, you know, apply for asylum or, you know, a trafficking visa or other relief that they might be eligible for. And that's not good for anyone. You know, even immigration judges and the lawyers who represent the government in these cases can do a better job when a child is not trying to represent themselves, right? A lawyer is also like especially important for unaccompanied children, because we know that many of these kids end up in unsafe situations. Some of them have been subject to labor exploitation and other dangers. A lawyer's another adult in a child's life who can help keep them safe and can take appropriate action when they are in a dangerous situation.
So just to give listeners an overview, at last count that I heard, there are about 26,000 unaccompanied minor kids in America. And right now we have the Donald Trump administration cutting back their rights, their access to attorney, their access to representation. So we have tiny children who are having to face judges alone and not understanding, of course, legal language. They're still learning how to read. And they are having their lawyers, their representation pulled back because they actually do have international and national rights with our existing system. And that is being ignored. Due process is being ignored. And it's being ignored again for tiny, tiny children. It is heartbreaking. Your organization ensures that children showing up in immigrant court have as much as possible high quality legal representation alongside them. Knowing that many are experiencing trauma and fear, can you tell us about the comprehensive approach that KIND does take when you can, and the services and supports you're offering kids?
Yeah, and you know, first I'll say that that number of, I think, 2,600, I think refers to kids who are in government shelters. Right now, there's many more unaccompanied children in the United States in need of legal representation. And, you know, KIND was founded in 2008 to really meet that need, because kids don't have a guaranteed right to counsel. And, you know, so KIND seeks to connect them with an attorney, either a staff attorney at KIND or a pro bono attorney. And to the extent we can, provide them with that sort of social service wraparound support that many kids need. As you said, that funding is under threat. We're happy that it's been temporarily extended. And so that's a bit of a reprieve so that these kids don't lose the lawyer that's so crucial for ensuring their protection. You know, I encourage folks to keep an eye on this, though, because I do agree with you that that funding is under threat, and we do want to see it continued. Otherwise, often the kids are just on their own.
How can listeners really get involved and support immigrant children? How can they get involved with the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House and standing up? What's your advice?
I'd encourage listeners to go to our website, supportkind.org. We always have, explainers and opportunities to take action. Other organizations that serve kids, I know do as well. I think engaging your members of Congress about protecting immigrant children is always really valuable, but it's especially important now because Congress is considering this budget bill that has passed the House and is now before the Senate that would really decimate the protection system that's currently in place for unaccompanied children that's intended to protect them from trafficking and other dangers. It does a lot of bad things for these kids, but one of the things is that it creates this really exorbitant fee structure that immigrants, including kids, would have to pay to seek protection in the United States. We've calculated that it would cost over $15,000 for most unaccompanied children to seek protection like asylum. And that includes $8,500 in a minimum of fees for an individual to sponsor an unaccompanied child. That is to provide the care for them while their immigration proceeding is ongoing. And that includes parents. So if a mom wanted to get their child out of a government shelter, they'd have to fork up this $8,500, which is just totally out of reach for so many of these kids' families. We want these kids to be sponsored by close family members who can often provide the most safe and loving home for them. And we're really concerned that if you make it too expensive for families to come forward and do this, we're going to end up with kids in really unsafe placements. So I know the bill is bad on a number of levels, and it's getting a lot of attention for the changes it's making to Medicaid and clean energy policy and tax policy. But there are these other really harmful provisions that we're worried will pass without anyone even paying attention to them. So I think it's up to all of us to call and write letters and make sure that it doesn't just go under the radar.
If people picked up the phone and called their U.S. Senator right now, we have just 1 minute left. What should they say?
I think they should say this bill needs to change drastically if you don't want it to harm children. It's going to harm lots of children, but especially immigrant children and unaccompanied children. So I would tell them to pay attention to these pieces and make sure that they know that their constituents are paying attention, because I think that, folks think they might that they'll get away with it with no one caring.
And one last time, how can people get involved with the work you're doing, support it, stay involved? Where can they find you?
Yes, so our website is supportkind.org, and we're on all the social media channels. Follow us, sign up for our emails, and then check in on our website, because we try to post these take actions where, we give folks the script that they can use when they want to do those phone calls or write those letters.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's really helpful. Thank you so much for being on. Thank you for all you do. Everybody, please support Kind. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you. We're going to take a quick break, but don't go away. Next up, we talk about the importance of fair treatment of all immigrant families and children, no matter where we work, live, or are. It's so important. We're going to hear more about that in a moment. Welcome back to Breaking Through with me, Kristen Rao-Finkbeiner, powered by Moms Rising. We have a great guest for you today, Kate Bahn of the Institute for Women's Policy Research, one of my favorite organizations. Welcome, Kate.
Hi, Kristen. I'm really excited to be here.
I'm so excited because you recently co-authored a report that was titled, wait for it, everyone, If Parenting Came with a Paycheck, Mothers of Young Children Would Earn $450 billion a year. I agree I agree,
Mhm.
because we are doing 500 trillion jobs, each of us as we parent. Can you share a little bit with our listeners about the gender differences in unpaid work and how that is impacting
Mhm.
women's economic security? And to the same end, this is a long compound question. Why policies that support pay equity for moms and women boost our economy as a whole? IWPR has some of my favorite stats on that.
Mhm.
What's happening? And we
Yeah, so two big questions, but they're kind in some way they're related to each other, and I'll get into that too. I mean, I think everybody knows that we spend a lot of time caregiving for other people in our family, particularly moms spend a lot of time caregiving for kids. And there's a big gender disparity in this. And so when we look at time use data, so data where we ask people how they spend their time, we find that mothers are spending 2.5 hours per day on what's called primary caregiving, and fathers are spending 1.5 hours a day on primary caregiving. And those are the times where you're directly doing some caregiving work and you can't be doing anything else. But then we also add on top of that what's called secondary caregiving. And so this is when, maybe you're folding the laundry while also taking care of a kid. So you're doing two things at once, but the real fact of the matter is for mothers that you can't go do another job at that time. You can't really be watching your kids while working another job. I think people who lived through the pandemic might know this as a reality. And when we look at that too, then it increases to mothers spending a total of 9 hours per day compared to fathers 6.4 hours a day. So that's a pretty big impact on women. And so when we're looking at just that primary part, that's the 450 billion you refer to. But then if we're thinking that secondary time where you can't work another job, say those women were instead had to pay for someone to take care of their kids for them, even if that was as cheap as the federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, which is unlikely, then it would be up to over $700 billion that we would be spending on caregiving each year.
as a whole,
Um,
as a country as a whole. I was feeling like
exactly.
it feels that way to me as an individual. So listeners, if you were thinking, yeah,
Yeah.
that tracks, it feels like 450 billion to me individually, but we're talking
Yeah.
as a whole.
Exactly. Yeah, across the country as a whole. And then the other piece was sort of pay equity. And that's, we released another piece of research at the same time. And mothers are really in this like double bind where you're doing the majority of caregiving at home, and then you're also paid less at work. And so what we're finding is that mothers make, something like 60% of what fathers are making. So a lot less. It's much worse for mothers of color. All mothers of color are making more like 45 to 50% what white fathers are making. So much, much lower earnings. And some others are both like strapped for time when they're outside work. When they are working, they earn less. Part of the reason mothers are earning less while they're working is because it's harder to find a job when you have caregiving constraints. Maybe you can't commute as far for work. Maybe you have to work a limited schedule. Maybe you're only working part-time. And so these things are really related to each other, that like women are basically just in an impossible position.
It's an impossible position, and 3 out of 4 families in America absolutely need the wages of moms to make ends meet, to put a roof over their heads, to put food on the table for
Yeah.
their children. So these wages are not like, oh, this is like some fun go buy ice cream money. No, this is the actual money that makes families be able to live and learn and be in community. So when we're looking at this, one of the things that is important is also how much these wage gaps are hurting our economy, and how much if we flip the frame and we had pay equity, it would boost our economy. IWPR has done a ton of work on that. Do you want to share some?
Yeah, not only IWPR, but another great economist, Heather Boucher, has done some work that I always think of when you bring up this framing about what does it mean for families if mothers earn more. You brought up that mothers are more likely to be breadwinners than they ever had before. We also know, as income inequality has gone up across the country, that mothers' increased earnings are the single factor that has maintained family incomes for the past 40 years. Like no other factor has maintained a family's ability to support itself besides moms engaging more in the labor market. So like it is critical to the work we're doing. But then IWPR broadly does a lot of work on how do we get to pay equity and what would pay equity mean? I'm thinking about it a lot right now in terms of being in a sort of tumultuous economy where we're sort of all holding our breath to see the impact of tariffs and other sort of different economic policies we're not used to, tax cuts, things like that. And what we know is that moms are facing higher rates of inflation if we think about things like moms spending more of their incomes on housing and childcare, which go up in price much higher than the overall rate of inflation. And so if moms earned more, it'd be easier for them to support those things. Moms consume more of their income directly rather than saving it. And moms being able to earn more and moms being able to spend more boosts the overall economy. So we know if moms got paid more, we'd have more economic activity because moms are spending more of their money. Instead, what we're seeing is that moms are spending more on the necessities and not able to spend as much throughout the economy.
Yeah, and that hurts our economy as a whole, which, as we've talked about, is based on, for better or worse, consumer spending. We no longer have a manufacturing economy. You've written that mothers need actionable policies. Yes, I agree. To address the intersectional motherhood penalty that they face, that they need policies that help them manage caregiving responsibilities, like access to affordable childcare, like access to paid family medical leave, like equal pay protections. Right now, we have Donald Trump in the White House and his Republican Congress actually undermining those very policies, trying to significantly roll back access to health care, to maternal health, to childcare, and to more. And yet, at the same time, they're oddly claiming they want women to have more children. We say, what, how, what, you're undercutting us. And we didn't see any bumps or expansion of the policies that moms, dads, parents, and our economy need in the big betrayal of our America budget bill. So I wondered if we could, again, you mentioned some of them, I just mentioned some of them, but just talk a little bit about the care policies that studies show that we need to help address the wage gap and lift our economy.
Yeah, I mean, I think of it sort of think about the life course of having a child. You can't have any just one of these policies. You kind of need all of them. And so, you need to be able to have paid family and medical leave. So when you at the birth of a child or a child coming into the family, you need to take some time off like right after that birth to be home with the child and physically recover. And then once you go back to work, you need to be able to afford childcare so that you can work while your child is being cared for. Then you also need things like access to sick leave so that if your kid gets sick, you can take care of your kid. And you need flexible scheduling so you can also manage things like school vacation weeks, early release days, all those sorts of things that we deal with if we are taking care of children. So you need all the policies together, and none of those are currently present at a federal level. There are some subsidies that help people afford childcare, but they're not entitlements. And so it means that everybody who's eligible for them is not receiving them. And exactly those policies are also being cut right now. So I think that's some of what we're seeing. But the other piece that you brought up too that I think is really important, think about this as an intersectional issue. We'd already discussed that moms of color are facing this much worse. The research shows that a big part of this pay gap that moms in particular face is because of discrimination against mothers. So all else equal, highly qualified women who have just as much work experience, they are just being paid less because they are women and because they're women of color and because they're moms. And what we see right now at the administration is with these anti-DEI initiatives, there's less resources being put behind anti-discrimination enforcement. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission currently does not have a quorum. They are not functioning. So we are taking away all the policies that would help the moms who are hurt the most by getting, what they deserve to be paid. While in the backdrop of, like, as you brought up, the pronatalist policies, and I think what I want to be really clear about with that is that they are talking about a specific type of mom that they want to be having more children. Because the fact of the matter is, if you were able to give more resources to moms of color, they'd be able to better parent how they want to. Immigration helps with population and making sure we have an adequate workforce. They really just mean they want white moms having white babies. And that is really sort of what their attention is on.
And it's horrifying when we actually look where some of the ideas in the pronatalist movement, of which Donald Trump is part, we actually look directly at Nazi Germany. So Donald Trump has actually proposed a motherhood medal for people who have more than 6 children. And that idea was one that was originated in Nazi Germany and has been actually replicated in many authoritarian governments over time in really harmful, racist, toxic, concerning, I'm like, without words, ways.
Yeah.
So, I had a question. I was like, okay, so Donald Trump's answer to people having trouble having kids is not building roads to economic security by creating structures that allow people to thrive, like structures relating to childcare, medical leave, and healthcare. No, he's burning those structures down. Instead, he has weird ideas like motherhood medals, which literally help no one. So then the question is, where did he get those ideas? And that's where you go into really looking deeply at the pronatalist movement and how racist, sexist, misogynistic, and fascist that actually movement is. And it is pretty scary. What's your take?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I mean, I am a new mom myself. I have a Black Jewish daughter, and I think about that, like, they do not want babies that look like her to be born. They don't want resources going to babies that look like her. And so it's pretty horrifying to see. And then, like, in from a less emotional place, it is also just not meeting families where they're at. This is not what the current American family looks like. My family is what the current American family looks like. My family looks more like a typical American family. And having policy that doesn't meet people where they're at is not meeting the needs of the country. And so I think that's sort of, it's both scary and authoritarian, and it's also just not realistic. It's not where we are right now. So it's just, wrongheaded too. So sometimes like I get frustrated when I yell at my news radio in the morning, where it's like both horrifying and scary, but also just like so silly and stupid. So like it's just, on multiple levels, it's frustrating to see.
I agree. Multiple levels of frustration, outrage. It's just
Mhm.
awful. So that brings us to, what can people do? We have a couple minutes left. If listeners like us are feeling this frustration, and I'm just like, wait, what? This they're really proposing that when we have an actual real crisis happening that is solvable, instead of solving the crisis, just really going down these really awful pathways. What can people do?
I think it's, incumbent on all of us, and everyone has the ability to be an expert on economic issues and understand how the economy works. This is not just the purview of economists like me. Like, we are all part of the economy. We all know the economy ourselves. And so people need to get educated, need to look things up themselves, need to find good resources. And I truly believe anyone can do this. Of course, IWPR.org is a great resource, but I think people need to get the knowledge for themselves, particularly in this era of misinformation. And so that's like the first step. And I think we also need to be looking towards other institutions and partners who can help people out right now. If the federal government is not a reliable partner right now in helping families thrive, but state and city governments are, labor unions are, community organizations are, people volunteering are. And when we look who those are, it's, the labor movement is led by women right now. It addresses women's needs. Black women have the highest rates of volunteerism in the country, and they are addressing people's real needs. And so I think it's about looking to those other partners and institutions who can make the world better right now, and we can support each other right now.
That is such good advice. That gave me hope. I was like, oh yeah, we have a state governments all across the country. We have bazillions city councils. Like, yes, let's go local, but don't give up on the federal. What should people say when they call their federal members of Congress? And people, we do hope you call your federal members of Congress, because your voice is needed.
I mean, let the federal members of Congress know what the population believes, which is that care policies are popular across the whole board. Let them know that. Let them know that they should be representing the people who are currently their constituents, who are families that look all different ways. And I think that is really important, especially there's a few key offices that we know are sort of the marginal ones who are more of a toss-up in how they're going to vote. Pressure those offices, pressure those moderate Republicans, pressure those centrist Democrats. And make sure particularly people in those districts are engaging and just letting their needs be known.
Thank you so much for being on. Thank you for all that you do. Everybody who's watching, everybody who's listening, I want you to please, please, please join IWPR. Follow IWPR. IWPR stands for the Institute for Women's Policy Research. Fabulous, fabulous organization. It's IWPR.org, and it's also on all social media. Thank you again.
Thank you so much, Kristen. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Thank you. We're going to take a quick break. Next up, we're talking about the importance of equal pay and why that lifts our whole economy. We'll be back in a quick flash. Welcome back to Breaking Through with me, Kristen Rao Finkbeiner, powered by Moms Rising. We have a really wonderful guest for you right now who's going to lift your spirits. I know it because we are all so outraged right now. We have Sharita Gruberg, who is with the National Partnership for Women and Families. Welcome, 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 Sharita.
Hi, Kristen. So excited to be here.
Thank you for being here. The National Partnership for Women and Families is spectacular, has been lifting women, lifting the economy, lifting families, lifting people for several decades. And I feel like we should start out with some of your greatest hits of wins. Why? Why do we want to talk about that? Okay, people are like, Kristen, why do you want to go in the past? Because right now, the headlines are bleak. What we're facing is really, honestly, quite scary. And we are really trying to fight back against cuts to programs that allow people to go to work, allow people to raise their kids, allow people to build good lives and contribute to their communities. But sometimes in the past, because of work of organizations and leaders like National Partnership and Sharita, we've actually been able to be proactive and win policies. And we're going to get to that point again, people. So let's start out by thinking about the power that we have been able to build and move together, because one day we'll be able to do that again and not just fight back against cuts to what is so important to our nation. So what are your favorite hits of wins?
Well, two of my favorite wins are recent ones. Within the last couple years, we, through the work of a bunch of advocates, including Moms Rising members, won some of the biggest civil rights protections that we've had in recent memory through the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, which not just prohibits discriminating against pregnant workers, but understanding that actually advancing equity and making a workplace that works for all requires accommodating the actual limitations that workers have while pregnant. Shocking things like giving a stool to sit on or allowing water breaks or bathroom breaks. These things should not be revolutionary, but took a new law to make it clear what employers' obligations were to not just not discriminate by saying, we're not going to hire you if you're pregnant, but to actually make conditions match those that would allow workers to not have to make the impossible choice between a safe pregnancy and their livelihood.
I think we should take a moment. Yay! Woo! Yay! Woo! Okay, that's a recent win. I love that one. Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, you all. It passed. Let's go to your other one. I heard you say
anniversary of it going into effect is June 27th. So a big win to celebrate. In the same piece of legislation that the Pregnant Worker Fairness Act was enacted in, we also got the Pump Act, which means all workers have the right to express breast milk in a safe and hygienic place. Your employer's got to give you the breaks, has to give you the space to do this. Again, basic, not so basic for so many working women.
And these both went through under President Biden, you all. But let's give them both a round of applause. Woo! 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 I could do like a whole happy dance. Also, the National Partnership for Women and Families, way back, helped pass the Family Medical Leave Act, which is unpaid, but does allow for some time off for people who work in companies with greater than 50 employees after you have a new baby, if you have a serious health crisis of your own or of a significant family member. And do you want to share a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, you gave a great overview. This was over 30 years ago. Congress enacted this law. It has allowed millions of workers to take the time that they need to take care of their families. I think we said, we're at like 50 million leaves taken, but I need to check that.
It's millions, tens of millions of people.
Millions of leaves taken.
Yes.
And it's been a sea change. It's been a sea change since it was enacted. Also, it was vetoed multiple times. Just a reminder that you lose a lot before you win. So folks should take heart. But we got it across the finish line, but it wasn't the end of our work. We knew the goal was paid leave, not unpaid leave. And we have seen in the years since how important it is to actually finish the job and get American workers the paid leave that they've earned.
And when we're talking about paid family medical leave, we're looking across the globe and we see the United States of America is actually one of only 6 countries that doesn't have paid family medical leave, at least for new parents. And so states have been marching paid family medical leave forward toward our nation's capital because studies show that businesses actually gain when we have paid family medical leave. We save lives. We have one of the highest maternal mortality rates of all industrialized nations. We save taxpayer dollars because studies show in the states that have had paid family medical leave for the longest that there's less need for SNAP and TANF and other government programs if you have that bit of bridge funding so that you can get from having the baby to being able to pay for childcare, which costs more than college. And so we see more than a dozen states have actually passed paid family medical leave laws, and just the absolute win from passing those laws has been demonstrated time and time again. That's why I imagine the states like marching forward toward the nation's capital so that our nation will finally pass paid family medical leave for everyone as an amendment to the FMLA, the Family Medical Leave Act. So we need to really push for that amendment to happen. I love proactive pushing. And the Family Act is about to be dropped. Now, people, if you're wondering, is this popular? Yes. 86% even of Trump voters support paid family medical leave. Democrats have babies, Republicans have babies, independents have babies, Green Party people have babies. You know, everybody across all political parties are having babies, and everybody is facing this crisis. When you have a baby without paid family medical leave, too often you're pushed out of much needed jobs and out of the labor force. Hundreds of thousands of people are pushed out, myself included. That's how I ended up in this whole situation with Moms Rising in the first place. Was my first step going, oh no, was a personal one like so many other people have experienced. So we are pushing forward on the Family Act. What's happening with that?
Well, it'll be reintroduced soon. I think they're just trying to look at calendars and see when exactly. You know, with this current Congress, as much as they like to give lip service to wanting more people to become parents and wanting more kids and praising mothers, they haven't actually taken action to match their words. And so wait, what was that?
Opposite. They've done the opposite. They've undercut moms. Anyway,
at every turn, at every turn. So while Family Act would be a huge win, Paid Leave for All just came out with polling yesterday. About 90+% of men support national paid family medical leave. We have business polling. We have just every way you cut the data. It is the most popular thing you could deliver. And yet we have a very tiny minority of folks in power who are refusing to represent the will of the country and not moving this forward. But we came within 1 vote of this during the Build Back Better fight. We were so freaking close. And so I think we're going to get the job done. Probably not this Congress, given that the leadership doesn't even want to give it a vote. But very, very soon, because as you said, Kristen, we've got these states marching on Washington. The momentum is growing. There's a bill in Pennsylvania that might get passed soon. And, you know, we need this and we need our policymakers to do it.
absolutely. And one of the things that I think is really important, and you named it, I'm going to double name it, is that the Republicans in Congress right now, and they hold the majority of the House, the Senate, and obviously Donald Trump is in the Oval Office. Those Republicans, the Republican leadership, are out of step with their own Republican constituents. Their own Republican constituents want these policies. They're not asking for this harm, weirdness, undercutting of healthcare, yuck. Instead, they're asking for policies like paid family medical leave, childcare, and healthcare. And so we have an actual Republican Congress and a Republican leadership that is, again, out of step with their own Republican constituents. Why do I say that? And why do I say it 900 times? Because we are in a moment of both moral, ethical, and legislative crisis. And it's actually also a constitutional crisis, by the way. We have a horrible moment happening in history. And the thing that we need everybody who's listening to do is not give up. So the reason why I started with Sharita talking about the wins that we've had both under President Biden and also decades ago is to just remind people that we are powerful together, that these policies, when we make sure that we hold the members of Congress accountable to our contributions and our needs, we can actually pass policies that are win-win-win-win for our economy, for our businesses, and for our families. But to do that, we're going to have to get through, up, and out of this current yuck and back into a place where leaders of any political party are actually listening to their constituents. We're not there right now. So what should people be doing in the meantime so they can persist, insist, and move forward change while we have like this cloud of yuck over our democracy?
Well, I mean, it is Pride Month, and as a queer person, I really lean on my movement ancestors and the stories that we heard about what it was like during the peak of the AIDS crisis when the government wouldn't even acknowledge what was happening to our community. And, we would protest the government during the day, we would bury our dead, and then we would dance all night. That's the story. Because we needed that joy, we needed that community, we needed that celebration to stay in it. This is a long haul fight. We are seeing things that we never thought would happen in America. Today a sitting senator dragged off by federal law enforcement. We didn't get here quickly, and we're not going to return to the country that we are all fighting so hard for quickly. And so each and every one of us needs to do what we can to stay in this fight and commit. And that includes taking care of ourselves, finding your community, finding your people like the Moms Rising crew, finding those moments of joy and creating them, and celebrating the wins when we have them, because we need to stay in this fight and we need to get that restorative space, whatever that looks like for you.
Yeah, and I would just add, celebrate the wins of the past and the future.
Yes.
Even though the present is really tough, just really knowing that together we're a powerful, often joyful force. So one of the things we're also telling people is you don't have to doom scroll all day. Like, the news headlines are incredibly depressing, and it is actually a tactic of the far right to have chaos and yuck in the news. It causes people to tune out. So you can tune out to doom scrolling all day, but don't tune out to protecting democracy and advancing family economic security policies. So Sharita, how can people become a member of the National Partnership for Women and Families and stay involved in a proactive way that actually really helps move our nation forward and isn't stuck in the yuck?
I love that. Isn't stuck in the yuck. Well, visit nationalpartnership.org and sign up for our updates. You will be kept up to date on not just the attacks, but how you can fight back. So please sign up today.
I love that. Nationalpartnership.org, you all. We need you to sign up. Now, as we are only have about a minute left, what are the top policies from the nationalpartnership.org's perspective that everybody needs to be keeping an eye on? And people can keep up to date on those policies on your website as well moving forward.
Of course. So there's a lot happening right now. As I said, the anniversary of the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act is June 27th. It is not safe from far-right attacks. The court recently enjoined the abortion protections in this rule. And there is an upcoming confirmation of a Trump nominee who is going to put an axe to protections for pregnant workers, for against sexual harassment, anything that has allowed women to join the workforce and thrive is under attack by this woman. Her name is Andrea Lucas. She is acting chair of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which is the independent government body that is there to protect our rights. There is a hearing in front of Senate Help on June 18th. You need to contact your senators and tell them that you oppose her nomination, because she will get in the way of you and your rights.
Thank you so much for sharing how we can make a difference. Thank you so much for fighting for justice every single day. Thank you so much for being on with us. Thank you, National Partnership for Women and Families. Everybody join them. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Kristen, and thanks to Moms Rising.
Thank you. Well, that's it for our show today. Thanks so much for tuning in as we tackle the top topics facing our nation in a way that requires the most boring disclaimer in the history of the planet Earth. Here goes. Views expressed on this show are those of the individual speakers and should not be attributed to Moms Rising, to this station, or to any news or social media service that may disseminate a recording of this show to the public or to any segment of the public. Boom! We'll catch you next week.